Hi, and welcome back to Investment Banking University's course, Investment Banking. This is the fifth video, and we're talking about the first side of the perpetuity in perpetuity science, which is the build side. The build side, of course, is associated with the building of perpetuities by entrepreneurs and corporations. So related to the intentional creation of perpetuities following a methodology, we have what is known as the build side. The build side is associated with the creation and management of perpetuities. Participants on the build side include startups, growing businesses, and established corporations. So our key question associated with the build side is how to build a perpetuity. So the process for building a perpetuity is going to be the following. We're going to first identify a challenge or opportunity in nature and make the case for a value perpetuity and ultimately a financial perpetuity via a total addressable market that exceeds a hurdle rate. The second part of this process is we're going to identify a key question associated with the challenge or opportunity. From there, we're going to develop a methodology that answers the key question, and we're going to take the fourth step, create a platform architecture consistent with this methodology. From there, we take the platform architecture and translate it into a minimum viable product of the platform. And ultimately, this platform is going to yield value for consumers in the form of a value perpetuity continuously through time. After which a period of time passes, once the value is demonstrated, it can then be monetized on, which turns the perpetuity, a value perpetuity, into a financial perpetuity. And then it's the responsibility of the perpetuity scientist to ensure its growth, translating a financial perpetuity into a growing financial perpetuity, and then ultimately into a diversified perpetuity. So we've already talked about the difference between a perpetuity scientist and a functional specialist, but within perpetuity science, there are definite phases of the perpetuity corresponding to levels of development of the perpetuity, including number 1, levels of customer concentration, number 2, levels of recurring revenue, and number 3, levels of owner dependence. And these are our actual key de-risking variables. And the two aspects of building a perpetuity are number 1, building the benefit stream, and then de-risking the benefit stream. And we're talking about here the de-risking of the benefit stream. So related to the levels of customer concentration, high levels of customer concentration correspond with a lower EBITDA multiple, and low levels of customer concentration correspond with a high EBITDA multiple. Levels of recurring revenue that are high correspond with a high EBITDA multiple, and low levels of recurring revenue correspond with a low EBITDA multiple. A high level of owner dependence corresponds with a lower EBITDA multiple, and at low levels of owner dependence correspond with a high EBITDA multiple. And if we think in terms of the market for perpetuities, this makes sense. A financial or a strategic buyer is ultimately going to want to buy a perpetuity that is not dependent on the owner for its existence. If it's dependent on the owner for its existence, there's a level of risk that increases. The R in the perpetuity formula increases, decreasing the valuation. So the perpetuity scientist, the CEO or consultant, is not only responsible for growing the benefit stream associated with the cash flow, but also de-risking factors that are alluded to here, which correspond to a discount rate or R. In doing so, the perpetuity scientist builds a highly sought-after perpetuity for both strategic and financial buyers, corresponding with a premium valuation. So in terms of the stages of the perpetuity, we're going to be going through 5 different stages, and we're going to take a look at the infographic really quickly so that we can see exactly what that looks like. So in terms of the stages of the perpetuity, we have the perpetuity phases, multiples, and market for perpetuity chart right here. But really what we're looking at first is we're looking at the bottom axis on stage of perpetuity, which shows you the first stage, syndication, the second stage, job shop, the third, perpetuity, the fourth, growing perpetuity, and then the fifth, diversified. And now we're going to go back and we're going to take a look at exactly what that means. So the first stage of the perpetuity, syndication, refers to getting to PMT, culminating or aggregating and putting together the resources to be able to monetize upon, and that is going from a value perpetuity into a financial perpetuity. And so the initial focus there is initial revenue generation. The key here is taking a concept that has a large enough total addressable market and turning it into a single sale as represented by PMT. This demonstrates product market fit between the minimum viable product or platform and allows the owner to invest additional time, energy, and resources into turning the syndication into a perpetuity. The syndication's value to the owner will be related to the DCF or NPV value. And however, since there is an inefficient market for syndications, the value is going to be discounted at a very large rate. The syndication is entirely reliant on the owner's active involvement, and if the owner no longer works in the syndication ceases to operate. So the next stage of the perpetuity, moving through time and increasing valuation, is the job shop. And that's from PMT1 to PMT2, PMT3. These are all disparate payments or disparate jobs associated with it, and that's why we call it the job shop. The initial efforts are to create a job shop. So the key here is taking a syndication that has demonstrated product market fit and turning it into a job shop with multiple projects as represented by PMT1, PMT2, PMT3. This demonstrates product market fit between the minimum viable product and platform and allows the owner to continue to invest time, energy, and resources. The job shop's valuation is based upon a multiple of its EBITDA and is usually in the range of about 3 to 5 times. The job shop is not entirely reliant on the owner's active involvement and thus has a larger multiple, albeit still an inefficient market for the prospective perpetuity, with likely buyers being individuals, lower middle market strategic and financial buyers. The owner's primary responsibility is to first turn the company into a project or job shop, and PMT representing any given job. The company is looked at as solely as a sum of the value of its projects and jobs, meaning that the valuation of the company is backward-looking. In terms of going from PMTs or separate disparate jobs into a durable benefit stream represented by cash flow over R, we get to perpetuity. The key here is taking a job shop with disparate projects, PMT1, PMT2, PMT3, and turning it into a perpetuity with a predictable, if not recurring, benefit stream. The perpetuity's value is based on a larger EBITDA multiple, since there is a more efficient market for perpetuities, with likely buyers being middle market, strategic, and financial buyers. The perpetuity is almost entirely not reliant on the owner's active involvement. From here, the owner is to turn the company into a perpetuity is characterized by predictable recurring revenues. This is done by building an organizational structure with division of labor, automated processes with technology, and a business model that is recurring by nature. When this is accomplished, the valuation becomes forward-looking. As we move on to the fourth phase of the perpetuity, we get to growing perpetuity, and this is from a benefit stream modeled by cash flow over R, CF over R, to CF over R minus G, because we have a growth rate. So that growth rate actually decreases the denominator, which increases the valuation or the formula. So going from a recurring revenue stream to a growing perpetuity, the key here is taking a perpetuity with a durable benefit stream cash flow and a reasonable amount of variability in that benefit stream R, and turning it into a growing perpetuity with a corresponding growth rate G. The perpetuity's value is based on an even larger EBITDA multiple, since there is there is a more efficient market for growing perpetuities, with likely buyers being middle market, strategic, and financial buyers, and in fact some public, strategic, and financial buyers. The growing perpetuity is almost entirely not reliant on the owner's active involvement, and this can be accomplished by building a scalable platform as part of the core business. The valuation of the company now has to incorporate a growth factor, and that's why we get the CF over R minus G. The fifth and final phase of the perpetuity is diversified, and this is where we think in terms of perpetuity 1 plus perpetuity 2. From one growing perpetuity to growing another perpetuity, either organically or purchasing one and growing inorganically. Finally, the owner is to diversify either organically, a new product or business, or inorganically. If diversification is organic, the new product or business will naturally move through the phases of the perpetuity, which we've already discussed, being syndication, project or job shop, perpetuity, and growing perpetuity. And since the valuation is forward-looking, it has to incorporate new product and business financial performance. And since the parent company is now becoming diversified, the discount rate will now decrease, which adds value to the parent company. So we talked about how to build a perpetuity, and we've talked about already the challenge or opportunity in the case for the value perpetuity and the financial perpetuity, and then translating that case into a key question associated with the challenge or opportunity, and then taking that key question, and the answer to that question is actually a methodology. And that methodology becomes the basis for the platform architecture consistent with the methodology. And then we take that architecture and translate that into a minimum viable product of the platform. That minimum viable product operates and adds value for consumers, which turns into a value perpetuity. That value perpetuity adds enough value to then be able to be monetized, which turns into a financial perpetuity. That financial perpetuity continues to grow through time, and it turns into a growing financial perpetuity. And then finally, we diversify, and we end up with a diversified perpetuity. So, of course, on the build side, we've already identified the key question, which is how to build a perpetuity. The two sub-questions with that are how to build a benefit stream, which is our CF in our perpetuity formula, CF over R. So we're going to now talk about how to build a benefit stream. So the CEO's role is to bring the company or opportunity through the stages of the perpetuity by building recurring benefit streams, i.e. cash flows, and at the same time de-risking those benefit streams. In doing so, the valuation of the perpetuity moves from backward-looking to forward-looking, and the valuation is maximized. So when we're thinking in terms of building a benefit stream, we have to deal with reasoning first, because we're ultimately going to be assessing in nature an opportunity or a challenge, and we're going to be building a platform to deal with that continuously through time. So in terms of reasoning to platform, the ultimate conclusion of reasoning is to build a platform to deal with a problem continuously through time that has value and thus can be monetized upon. So we're talking about identifying an opportunity or a challenge in nature, the key question to sort of frame the issue, and then we're going to be developing a methodology that answers the key question. We're going to be building a platform around the methodology and then turning that platform into a perpetuity. Oftentimes, it's very helpful to think in terms of an existing platform and then applying that to a new value theme. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some cases of doing that. So a common way to begin on the build side is to take an existing platform and apply the concept to a new value theme. And we're going to discuss this in great detail in the cases, as I just mentioned. It's important to make the distinction between platform and mod in building a benefit stream. Platform is associated with a network and is the core value, the connecting of individuals in an integrated platform. Platform is ultimately the basis for becoming a perpetuity. Mod, on the other hand, is associated with a specific functionality, and we're going to talk a little about that in the different cases. So in terms of the value of technology and science, this is very helpful when learning about perpetuity science. It's important to know and not get pulled into the trap of technology as an end to itself. So technology and science has value in as much as they are associated with a perpetuity. Technology and science in isolation doesn't have any value when it's not related to a perpetuity, and ultimately can be a waste of time. So the consumption process as it relates to building of a benefit stream, and then growth hacking that consumption process is what we're going to talk about now. So it is important to have appropriate expectations regarding growth and returns. One does not simply build an MVP and turn on users with a switch. Brands are built one person at a time, and consumption follows a definite process, which includes, number one, awareness of the methodology being advocated to directly on a social network or via email or some other method. The methodology adds value for the individual based on reason, and thus the user decides to be a follower of that startup. Followership of the brand adds value enough so that when the ask is made, the individual is willing to experiment with usage. Usage adds value enough so that the user becomes an active user. Active usage adds value enough so that the individual is willing to recommend others to become users. And ultimately, active users are willing to pay for usage at a certain period of time. Since there is a definite process to consumption that we just talked about, one's growth hacking methodology should be consistent with this fact. The growth hacking methodology means connecting with individuals on various social networks or other platforms or channels including some of the well-known ones like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, to first advocate the startup's methodology. So what we're first going to be doing in terms of growth hacking, the consumption process to expedite usage and then monetization is, number one, we're going to develop thought leadership in the form of a methodology. Number two, we're going to advocate that methodology at first contact. And then ultimately, three, acquire followership. We're going to convert that followership into users in the fourth step. And then step five, we're going to convert those users into active users. And ultimately, we're going to monetize on those.